Yo, what is going on, guys? SMH Super Mario Hoops back with some more hoops, and today we are hopping right back into our top 50 list in NBA history for the 5K special. Now today we got none other than George Gervin, who's better known as the Iceman. Now, where do I have George Gervin, the Iceman, ranked on my all-time list? I currently have him ranked at number 32 as of today. Now, before we get into George Gervin, I'm going to need you guys to hit the like button. Feel free to subscribe, hit that notification bell so you'll get updates every time I post a new video, whether it's something else on this list or just a video down the line that I think you might enjoy as well. But without further ado, let's get into George Gervin. Now, over the course of his career, Gervin was a 9-time NBA All-Star every year from 1977 until 1985. He was also a 7-time All-NBA member. 5 times he made All-NBA first team from 1978 until 1982. And in those outskirt years, he made All-NBA second team in 1977 and 1983. Now, something that's under the radar about George Gervin is that he's actually a 4-time NBA scoring champion in 1978, 1979, 1980, and 1982. Now, of course, George Gervin doesn't have the longest NBA career among most players in this list, and that's because he started his career in the ABA, making multiple All-Star and All-ABA teams in their league as well. One thing that's for sure is that George Gervin is one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. In terms of the regular season, he has a career average of 26.2 points per game in the regular season, as well as 27 points per game in the playoffs, in which on both of these lists he falls at 9th all-time in NBA history. He also did this on 57.2% true shooting for the regular season and 56.4% true shooting for the playoffs, which for a player that didn't frequently shoot the three-point shot, I mean, that's pretty impressive. However, when we retract back to the scoring, the only players that had more points per game than him in both the regular season and the playoffs were Michael Jordan, Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, and Allen Iverson. In terms of his MVP shares, he received votes on 7 different seasons, including being a top 10 finisher 6 times, a top 3 finisher 3 times, and he was a 2-time runner-up in 1977-1978, as well as 1978-1979. Now, the second of those 2 years in losing to Moses Malone, it was pretty reasonable given how impactful he was to the Rockets that year. But George Gervin, in my opinion, should have been named the 1978 NBA MVP over Bill Walton. I mean, Gervin was a significantly better volume and efficiency scorer than Bill Walton, and he even accounted for more win shares that year as well. He also was a more versatile defender than Bill Walton, who, while he was an elite rim protector, his perimeter defense was substantially worse than the Iceman's rim protection. And I know you might think that's stupid, considering rim protection should have more value, but Gervin really wasn't a liability in either department, and that should be noted. But let's say you disagree with that. Then let me add in the fact that Bill Walton had a partner in crime by the name of Maurice Lucas, who was 6th in MVP voting, first team All-Defensive, an All-Star, and All-NBA second team that year, while Gervin did not have a teammate who even got any MVP shares. And 2, the fact that George Gervin played all 82 games that season, while Bill Walton only played 58. I mean, think back to just last season. I mean, early in the year, Joel Embiid was the MVP frontrunner. And as the 1 seed in the East on elite two-way numbers, the award looked like his. That was until he got hurt. And then Jokic, who played every game this year, won by a significant margin. And I'm not sitting here saying that Jokic didn't deserve the MVP just because he played more games. I'm saying quite the opposite, actually. Because if we stay true to that criteria for the past year, then there's no reason why George Gervin shouldn't have won MVP in 1978. It was a wrongdoing by the league, and quite honestly, I think it's the biggest MVP ripoff ever. But now that we just made it clear that George Gervin is unofficially a 1-time league MVP as well, let's talk about his playoff career. Now, I'm going to start off by saying that of every player in NBA history to never make it to the NBA Finals, I think George Gervin ranks the highest all time, which might surprise you guys since I'm a Steve Nash fan. I've made videos about how much I appreciate guys like Dominique Wilkins or Pistol Pete Maravich, But no, I believe it is George Gervin, the Iceman. From a stats standpoint, Gervin stayed relatively consistent with his regular season play, which is still pretty good. I know in other videos I've slandered players for not having great playoffs, but that's only if their drop-off is significant in the postseason during their bulk of their peak, or when comparing for a player's career, especially if they keep the same role throughout, and Gervin did all his time with the Spurs, but he just didn't drop off. In fact, in his 11 playoff series with the Spurs, he averaged 20 points per game in all 11 and 30 points per game in 4 of them. He shot 50% from the field in 7 of 11 series and even managed to shoot 60% from the field in a 1983 semifinal series win over the Alex English-led Denver Nuggets 4-1. Now, one thing that some people might hold against George Gervin is the fact that he wasn't always a willing passer, and that is pretty fair to say. He did have pretty low assist values for most of his career. But if the team was successful with him as primarily a scoring perimeter player that can play great defense on the player of the other team that's giving them the most problems, then you don't have to worry much about that. I mean, in fact, in the 9 years with San Antonio in the NBA from 1976 to 1985, Gervin led the Spurs to a top 2 seed 5 times and a 50-win season 3 times. But going back to his playoffs, there isn't much more to say than he was a consistent and efficient scorer. If you want to find maybe his worst playoff series of his career with the Spurs, statistically speaking, it probably would be 1983 in the Western Conference Finals against the Showtime Lakers. The Spurs lost in 6, and Gervin averaged 22.7 points per game, 5.8 rebounds a game, 3.3 assists per game, and 1 steal per game on about 46% shooting from the field and 87% from the free throw line. Now, I guess if you want to go real hard against Gervin here, you could argue that Mike Mitchell was the best Spurs player in this series, but this was pretty much the only series Gervin played with San Antonio where you can make an argument for that. The Spurs still weren't even the favorites to win this series, so it does seem a bit ridiculous to pose an argument for saying Gervin is some playoff fraud using this series as, a big part of your argument. Now, usually in every video for this list, I would provide some accumulative all-time stats at some point, but like I mentioned, Gervin played a decent amount of years in the ABA before joining the NBA, so he isn't ranked extremely high on a lot of them. And if we were to include ABA with NBA stats, he would certainly be near the top of the rankings for a lot of them. I mean, after all, he did make the ABA all-time team, but however, even in his time in the NBA, he still had 70.4 offensive win shares for 55th all-time, 3.6 offensive box plus minus for 37th all-time, and a 30.7% usage rate, good for 8th all-time. So to put it simply, for a large percentage of time in the NBA than most players in their whole careers, and in a short amount of time as well, George Gervin was one of the most efficient scorers and offensive players in NBA history and had minimal time where he was able to take a break from the primary offensive focus. Of course, that year in Chicago, he was able to do that, but he also battled lingering injuries that year, as well as some issues with the Bulls that resulted in him leaving to play a few years overseas before closing his basketball career as well. So when it comes to ranking George Gervin, aka the Iceman, I believe that he is still pretty underrated. Rarely do I ever see people put him in the top 5 nod for players without an NBA title, and if he isn't in your list, then he should at least be in the convo. His nickname, the Iceman, fits just because of how cold of a scorer he was. Not talking about like the snowflakes you get on 2K when you're 64 overall in my career and he shoots 2 for 19 from the field, but he was cold in the meaning of just being nasty. I mean, he's another player who changed the game in a way with his signature move, the finger roll. I mean, Steph Curry, for example, does that every warm-up before every game, but the Iceman simply just made it cool. But I guess that's just what he always does. It's in the name after all. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. I feel like a lot of people don't know much about George Gervin, considering the fact that, like I said, he never made the NBA Finals. He never really had a reputation of winning a championship because, well, he didn't. So a lot of people kind of just leave him back in NBA history. Nobody ever talks about his all-time Spurs teams because, quite frankly, he never really had that elite second option. He had a few years with Artis Gilmore near the end of his time with the Spurs, but he's even another player that people sleep on all time. But I think if you gave George Gervin some more support, maybe talk about the Celtics with what they had around Larry Bird, or if he was on the Showtime Lakers, or if he was in Dr. J's place in Philadelphia, if he got to play with the Bulls with Pippen. I know this is a different timeline, and I know it wouldn't really make sense, But if he was in Jordan's place instead of Pippen, I think they probably could have won at least a championship. There's so many different scenarios where he could have been a lot more successful. I mean, if you just go back and look at some of the teammates he had in San Antonio, they just don't really compare with a lot of the greatest players in NBA history. And I'm not going to hold that against a player like that just because this was an era where loyalty was more significant. I mean, you see players now, they all want to form super teams, they all want to leave just to save their legacy. That wasn't the mantra back then. And of course, he didn't end his career with the Spurs, but I think any Spurs fan will tell you that he's a Spur for life. But yeah, let me know if you know anything else about like the Iceman, like what your thoughts are on him. I know he's one of my dad's favorite players in NBA history, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I don't think I am. I think I was pretty fair with George Gervin here. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to watch some George Gervin highlights after this. What am I even talking about? You guys have been watching the back the whole time, and you're not even listening to what I'm saying, probably. It's okay. I'll play second fiddle to the Iceman. And I think that's going to do it for me, so I'm out. Peace.